Humanity versus bigotry.
The hand of fellowship.
They did the job.
Captain gets key to apartment.
Good neighbors at
Praises
Waverly.
City for helping
City gets back
serviceman.
to normal as Daniel's incident ends.
Beyond the headlines is a man who just wanted to move closer to work. Captain Virgil Daniels' time in Waverly, Iowa was brief but eventful. While he was there, he faced discrimination, but he also felt the heart of brotherhood.
Virgil was a family name that nobody used. And so to me, it was Dan and Uncle Dan, and everyone knew him as that. So when you have that kind of a nickname, you can get the personality that goes with it. So he would be easygoing, he would be very attentive, he would be very kind, and he was very agreeable. He was inclined to smile. So he was a nice guy, different from his brothers. He was very uniquely identifiable as himself. They all had an incredible sense of humor. They laughed at everything, and they got through life because I know it was said about my father that he had fun where there was none.
But outside their home of Jacksonville, Florida, the world was still run by Jim Crow laws.
The water fountain said colored, only in white. And if you did go anywhere, you took a bus. And if you got on the bus, the family who lived there were black. So they went to the back of the bus. It's the first time that I actually saw what segregation was like. And Dan never told me about the bitterness of any experience. It does, in retrospect, make it clear why you would want to leave.
Virgil did leave Jacksonville, and in the midst of World War II, he was called to serve his country.
There was also a push in this period by African American leaders to get African Americans into the Army Air Forces so that we have a training program that gets established at Tuskegee in Alabama, and collectively they're known as the Tuskegee Airmen.
He graduated from the Tuskegee Institute in 1944. Trained as a twin-engine flight officer, his service took him to Japan in World War II and Korea during the Korean conflict.
So he had 3,000 hours of flight time in the war.
The wars ended, but Virgil's time with the Air Force did not.
He would ultimately be promoted to second lieutenant and first lieutenant, and then captain by the time he arrives in Waverly. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the United States invested in a series of radar stations that were intended to detect aircraft coming at the United States, especially over the North Pole. And this is early in the Cold War, and so these radar bases were intended to provide the U.S. military early warning of an impending attack.
In 1955, Captain Daniels was stationed at the Waverly Air Force Station. His wife, Inez, and their 3 kids joined him there.
The base at that point didn't have housing for married officers available. There were barracks and there were areas where single officers could stay, but there isn't a family housing available at that time.
He lived in Waterloo and he had to commute. And that was a 21-mile commute. Captain Daniels lived on Cottage Street, but in an area at that time it was known as the Negro section.
Wanting to avoid the commute, Captain Daniels looked to find housing in Waverly.
Captain Virgil Daniels was exactly the sort of person you would want in this community. Family man, military experience, how could you say anything to impeach his character?
In his search, Captain Daniels found the Miller Apartments. He put in his application and the family prepared to move.
Some of the local residents learned that there was an African American moving into their apartment buildings, and they didn't want him moving in, and they spoke to the landlord, and they said, if he moves in, we're moving out.
When the landlord spoke to Captain Daniels about this, the captain decided to withdraw his application.
He was not interested in trying to challenge the hostility that he might have faced there.
But other Miller apartment residents, like Sherman Spear, learned that Captain Daniels had withdrawn his application after learning of the resistance.
Spear thought that was wrong.
Spear penned a letter to the editor saying, "This man was patriotic enough to wear the uniform of his country, but he was made unwelcome in Waverly." Along with Spear's letter, a petition to welcome the Daniels family to the Miller apartments was published in Waverly newspapers. 16 of the 24 tenants signed in agreement.
Some of them, I would note from a photo of the group, were officers themselves in the United States Air Force and were presumably stationed at the Waverly Air Force Station.
The tenants who signed the petition also held a presentation of a key to Captain Daniels. Along with the key, they banded together to provide the down payment on the apartment. The captain said the demonstration made him feel very warm, and that his faith in his friends and the people of Waverly has been justified. But the shadow of racial prejudice still hung over the Daniels family.
In that intervening time, I think he recognized that this was not a place where he would be comfortable with his family. There was a house 1 block away on 2nd Avenue from where I lived. So that's where Captain Daniels and his family moved in. So his housing situation was solved.
In newspaper coverage, Captain Daniels is quoted saying, "It sure is wonderful how all this turned out. The people here have treated us fine." Although his housing situation was solved, the impact on the community was just beginning. Newspapers from across the country covered the story, calling Waverly's embrace of the Daniels family a lesson in brotherhood.
And it went much further than the confines of northeastern Iowa.
Representatives from Life magazine visited Waverly to cover a welcoming coffee for the Daniels family. This put a nationwide spotlight on the incident. And with the attention came an outpouring of support for the people of Waverly.
Dear Sherm, you're entirely too modest, my boy. During
Dear
the recent
Sherm,
editorial-
thought you might be interested in these clippings. They appeared in the
I
Seattle,
want to commend
Washington
and
Times.
compliment you on the action that you
I
have
shall
started
appreciate
in
it
Waverly.
if you would convey to your
Dear
wife
Sherman,
my congratulations.
Thank you very much for the material you sent on the Fund for the
We here at the
Republic
university
Incorporated.
certainly enjoy reading the many newspaper articles relative to your
I
activities.
want to take
in
the time
breaking
to
down
compliment you on your attitude in the Captain Virgil Daniels and family
Spear.
incident.
Please accept this letter in the spirit in which it is written. Admiration.
Though I am not a resident of Waverly, I cannot resist telling you how heartwarming it is to read of the happy outcome to the unfortunate incident regarding Captain Virgil Daniels and his family.
In the excitement, the nation learned about Waverly, but not much about Captain Daniels. Instead, the focus was on Sherman Spear, the man who wrote the initial letter to the editor. But praise was not his intention. He said, "It is our sincere desire that what we did may become so common that only the absence of such action will cause comment." The coverage caught the attention of the Ford Foundation's Fund for the Republic, an organization looking to fund the advancement of civil liberty in the United States.
They wanted to recognize examples of where people stopped in their tracks and realized this cannot stand. This cannot happen.
The Ford Foundation awarded Waverly $10,000 for their apology and subsequent welcome to the Daniels family.
When the Ford Foundation awarded $10,000 to the city, they awarded it to the city, to the people of Waverly.
The award was the first of its kind. The foundation said that efforts such as Spear's and the townspeople's give meaning and life to our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Waverly has set a good example for the country. In accepting the check, Spear said, "The fact that we so little deserve what you are doing for us does not, in the slightest, lessen our gratitude. We feel we little deserve such generosity for only trying to be courteous, and helpful to someone in difficulty.
The fund came without much in the way of restrictions.
After much deliberation, it was determined that the fund would be used to serve as an endowment for scholarships. Students continuing to study issues of civil liberties and human rights were awarded the money. That scholarship was named in honor of Captain Daniels, but the Daniels family's time in Waverly was brief. A year after moving into their home, Captain Daniels was transferred to the Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. Inez and the kids followed him there, but their presence was not forgotten in Waverly.
I know the subject matter is serious, but it's more about how you react to it and how you manage it and how you move on from it. And that's something that is a lesson that should be repeated again and again today.
One small town in the Midwest was able to do the right thing. And they did it at the behest of one or two or three individuals.
And I think that honestly, the story of Virgil Daniels does have a redeeming factor to it. That yes, there was racism in Waverly. I'm sure there's still racism in Waverly. But if we have people who are willing to step forward and be on the front lines so that our oppressed minorities don't have to be always the ones taking the brunt of discrimination, if there's people willing to step forward and be allies, we can make this a better place for everyone to live.
Didn't blame anybody. They didn't ask for help. They didn't behave like victims. They laughed. They lived as well as they could. None of it was more than he could manage. I think that they're all remembered fondly. He was a person who came from a family of character, who demonstrated what it means to live through the war and through segregation, to live through the American experience.
Virgil Daniels retired from the Air Force as a major. His character and perseverance endures forever in his legacy.